Welcome everyone. And what I wanted to spend the next few minutes is essentially giving you an overview of how how we view product management as a career profession. Why do people make the shift? What do we look for in product managers? And then also just talking a little bit about how do people get there. So moving on to the next slide, Venkesh, if we could. So product management, the why and the what. And a lot of us didn't start off in product management. We started off in other functions. I started off in engineering, and sort of a lot of others started off in other functions. But eventually, we all become product managers. And the reason for that is a few things. One is, as you start to work on products, you start to realize that at least many of us who made the shift start to realize that we really want to own all aspects of the product, in the sense of you want to become a CEO of the product, where you handle this product all the way from strategy through delivery and then its success in the market. So essentially, you want to be held accountable for the success of the product. And what that means is that you really need to understand what is the product and who is it for, the why and the what of your customers. So essentially, what are the markets that you operate in, what are these markets about, understanding the customer problems, understanding the customer very deeply. And many of us, when we work in other functions, don't necessarily focus on that. We focus on the how of it. We really focus on the delivery, whether it is the technology aspects of it, whether it is the manufacturing aspect of it, or those kinds of things. But we don't sometimes think about the customer. So a product manager, a good one, and those of us who make this on a daily basis, really try to get into the head of the customer and really understand their problems. And the third thing, which is pretty critical, is that you want to own all parts of the success of the problem, which is everything from working with internal people to also working with external people to make it a success. So ultimately, it's about delivering a compelling, competitive, and profitable solution to the market problem. Okay, next slide, please. So when we look at product management, there are possibly three major areas that we look for in a dimension of the product management. The first one being the functional expertise. This is about being the nuts and bolts of being a product manager, which is everything from, like I mentioned, understanding your customer, which means market research, understanding the competition the environment that you operate in, the other companies that are servicing the same customers, which is a competitive analysis. Really understanding the customer problem, and hence from that, figuring out what the requirements are for a new product that we may be launching in the market, or for requirements for enhancing an existing product. And then finally, about breaking that down into what we call features, and then putting together a roadmap which just extends over a number of years. So a product manager always balances the short-term deliverables of the business with the long-term success of the business itself. So a product manager really straddles both sides of the fence in terms of doing that. So the functional expertise is very critical in terms of how we think about the tools that the product manager uses. The second area is domain expertise. And the domain expertise doesn't matter. I mean, there is a popular notion that to be a product manager, you need to be in the technology arena, like in mobile or internet or software. But that's not true. There are domain experts in other areas as well. Automotive. I started off in automotive myself and then moved on to software. So there are people in pharma. So essentially, product manager is really more a way of living in some sense within a company or product company, where essentially there are many domains that people operate. The second thing is the technology depth for the domain. So this is not about building the product or really understanding the nuts and bolts of engineering, or in software case, really being the person who writes the code. This is about understanding the technology that you work with. And the reason for that is you really need to know what is possible, or what could be possible. And then building a solution or a solution to a problem that the customer has using those technologies, but ultimately it can be delivered by other members of your team. The third area is understanding trend shift. This is really important because every domain is changing constantly. And it's very important for the product manager to keep an eye on what is changing, so that they see that both as an opportunity to bring in new types of technology or new types of changes in the domain. It opens up new opportunities, or perhaps even opens up a new opportunity with a new customer segment that they have not been addressing. The third area, the first two are much more hard skills, right? Because this is about actually using tools to achieve something. The third area, which is actually as important as the other two, is soft skills. And soft skills really is several traits of a product manager. One is leadership by influence. A product manager rarely has people, hardline reporting into them. In many cases, they are individual contributors, even at very senior levels. And really, but the thing that a product manager does, since they work with so many different people, is they become leaders by choice. And they become leaders by, others looking up to them in terms of understanding the customers, understanding the market, understanding competition. And so they lead by influence. They, they have to exert many different kinds of skills to actually be able to do that. The second thing is passion and belief. A product manager, can create an excellent atmosphere for the whole team in terms of bringing their passion and belief of success to the market, to the team itself. So that is internally, and then externally being able to project that with the customers for the success of the product. And the last but not least is the fact that they're outstanding communicators. This is not just oral communication, it's written communication, it's all forms of communication. But the product manager is not afraid to go out and actually sell people in some sense, internally or externally, about the fact that their passion and belief and their leadership make everybody successful. So they're really good communicators in making everybody understand where they stand, how they need to operate, and what does success mean to the overall team. Pinkesh, moving on to the next slide. So how does this work? So how do you become a product manager? So there are possibly two paths. I mean, you don't exit generally from your undergraduate. People graduate with many degrees, but over time there are two ways in which they can become, kind of move towards becoming a product manager. One is what I would call education accelerator. This is where you would go out and get an MBA, or you would get some other kinds of a certification that actually trains you, giving you the tools necessary to becoming a product manager. Or they could go through very specialized programs, and this is something that there are people who go through very verticalized programs. Even experienced product managers undergo continuous education in order to achieve some of these results. The second way of doing this, and this is and I've seen successes in both ways. The second way of doing this is work experience based. So people starting out, start to get more curious about the product that they're working on, and they're starting to understand markets and customers. Even while you are an engineer or you are a manufacturing person or whatever, you start to understand the market and the customers that you're working with. Who are your customers? And one of the traits I didn't mention in terms of being a product manager is that they're very curious people. They really want to know more. They really want to understand who they are that they are servicing. So starting to understand, so you could start out by starting to understand working, with your product manager, for example, on both understanding the market as well as stretch projects or side projects. Product managers always have more on their hands than they can do. So they're always happy to have somebody who's stepping up, perhaps wants to help out on, let's say, market research, or going out and talking to customers to collect data, or analyzing the market in terms of understanding the competition. So a lot of people start to work on these side projects along with their product managers and start to learn what the product management function is about. The good part of doing this is that they can then learn, they can understand whether they want to become product managers or are they comfortable continuing to do what they're doing. So that's one way to do that. And then last but not least, there are a lot of forums, public forums for product managers, particularly in India over the last few years. Some of these are starting to develop across many cities across India. These are good places for to go and network with others who are either thinking about doing the same thing or already in the profession, and understanding from them as to how they either making the journey or made their journey and what they do on a daily basis. So that's what I had as an introductory set of slides. In case I'll let you take it.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Ram. And Mohini, are we going to take questions as and when it comes along, or should we wait till the end?
That is totally your take, Mr. Pinkesh. If you want to take
so
it
feel
up.
Free to, yeah, feel free to ask questions, guys, because let's make this as interactive as possible, which I know it's sometimes hard over a webinar, but let's at least give it a shot. Now, while we have questions from the audience, I had a couple for you, Ram. You mentioned, three aspects of the product management, and essentially the whole domain expertise. Do you understand enough about that domain? The whole functional area. Do you know how to build a business plan? Do you know how to do customer insighting? What are the different formal methodologies of even doing market research? And then the third one was your soft skills, leadership skills, which includes everything from communication to negotiation to all of that. Now, you obviously are vice president in one of the kind of most darling companies of the world, I should say, and certainly in India. And I'm sure you're hiring, and you hire a lot. If you had to place a prioritization in terms of weights, if across those three things, especially when somebody is coming into the organization, maybe fairly new to the role, is there one factor more important than the other out of the three that you mentioned?
Yeah, good question, Kesh. I think all three are important, but the way I would look at this is the first thing we do is we look for functional expertise. So this depends on whether it's an entry-level person or it is somebody who is, who's experienced product manager, whom you're looking to hire. Let me start with the experienced product manager first. In that case, we would definitely, the first thing we would look for is functional expertise. And the reason for that is if this person knows the domain, has all the right tools and has shown past record of having used them effectively, then that's one less area for us to, for that person to kind of come up to speed. The second thing we look for is the soft skills. We need to, we look for demonstrated ability to being a leader, success, how good are they in communications, etc. And then the third area is domain. And in a lot of cases, especially in areas like ours, which is the internet or mobile, these are a lot of these are emerging fields, and we don't necessarily find people with a lot of domain expertise, particularly in India. So what we look for there is the demonstrated ability for this person to be actually learning. So have they worked, across domains in the past where they have shown the ability to actually switch domains and the ability to learn? So we test for those kinds of. So the way I would stack rank this is to look for functional expertise 1, soft skills 2, and then domain expertise 3.
Got it. And this is you're saying more for the experience or more for the newbies who are trying to get into the career path?
Yeah, these are for the experienced product managers that we're looking to bring in. Now, for a new product manager, we do a couple of things. One is, of course, we look to hire new graduates from MBA schools who come in initially as interns for us. Some of them do. They join us as summer interns and spend the summer with us, and then they go on, and then we make offers to some of them. And there are others that we recruit directly from university. So that's, when I talked about becoming a product manager. So that's the first step, which is the education accelerator. Somebody who has gone through an equivalent coursework for an MBA or a mini MBA or something like that. The second kind of person we look for is our internal candidates who are looking to move from, let's say, engineering or quality assurance or some of the other areas into becoming a product manager. In which case we follow the path that I mentioned, which is essentially we look to pair them up with a product manager who they already either work with or some other experienced product manager in the company who can give them projects, they work on side projects, etc. And in parallel, they may be doing other kinds of, certification or something, in addition to that to gain some of the tools. But we give them on-the-job work experience and then test to see whether they actually will make a good product manager. And if they do, then they transition over to becoming a product. So we follow both paths.
Excellent, and this is also a great opportunity because they, they might think what product management is, but unless you start doing some of it, it might be hard, and they might realize, boy, I'm better off as a pre-sales or a techie or an architect, or even a project manager for that matter, rather than getting into a more strategic role, right? So that might be a good.
That's right, absolutely, and sometimes people also gain an appreciation for how to think about customers, and they just become better in whatever they're doing already, because they're now thinking customers other than just thinking about whatever short-term goals that they have in mind. So overall, actually, we find that it improves the dialogue that happens within the company and their ability to gain empathy for the customer.
Got it. So a couple of questions have come in, and I'm just going to try and maybe combine one or two here in the interest of time. So Saurabh Joshi has a question on product management certification. A related question from Pradeep is how much does an MBA degree weigh in the overall product management role? So you mentioned a little bit about MBA certifications, which is obviously the kind of questions that we're having here from the audience. So in your opinion, how helpful is that as a hiring manager for you to be able to look at this credential and say, okay, how important is this overall into the weighing factor in your decision making?
See, the thing is, the reason we look for, so let's say an MBA, for example, or an equivalent coursework that they've done, or courses or certification they've done, is because then we don't need to worry about the fact that will this person have functional expertise or not. Because a lot of these courses start teaching you the tools that are needed to becoming a product manager. Obviously, they have not used it yet, in which case they will do that on the job. But at least they know the frameworks that are necessary. For example, how to do effective customer research, how to do effective competitive analysis, how to make decisions. So those kinds of things are available. The second thing is many of these courses and like the MBA programs, for example, they teach also soft skills. They teach you about communication, teamwork. How to communicate your mission, vision for your product or some area that you're working on. So a lot of the soft skills, at least the tools necessary for the soft skills, are also made available when you're going through these kinds of certification or degree programs. So those two things are, like I mentioned earlier, are 1 and 2 that we look for in terms of, good product manager, above average product manager. So that's the reason why it's one of the parts that I mentioned to becoming a product manager is you go do these kinds of courses. Obviously, the courses only give you the tools, and then you have to apply them, and that comes with on-the-job training. So we look to see, does the person have the right tools? We test for that in our interview process. We look to see if this person can communicate well. And then we bring them in, and then of course we see also whether this person has a good credentials in terms of, past understanding and learning, so that they can pick up new domain easily. And then that's how we look for in a person who's coming in from the outside.
Makes sense. So two things I kind of noticed, right? One is you said that it's not necessarily that you have to come from the same domain. People do shift domains all the time. Looks like you did that early in your career path. As you mentioned, you went from the automotive industry to the IT, the software side. So I think it's what's more important then as you do that transition is to also be able to demonstrate that functional skills. And certainly what you're saying is that the MBA or the certification could help, communicate that it's being validated at a certain level, at a certain baseline, right?
That's right, exactly.
Now here's another question from Rishikesh who talks about, how is this product management role, different from a systems analyst or a business analyst role? And often we see a lot of business analyst role, obviously, especially in the IT services or services space. For example, do you even have, looking at your own experience at Yahoo, do you have like a business analyst role? And the second question maybe related to it is, how do you see that being, different than a full-fledged product management role?
Yeah, we do have business analyst roles, but they are really more in what we call our analytics team, where we look at customer data and try to drill down on customer behavior issues or what people are doing, let's say on the internet. But the difference I see is the fact that I think business analyst is a critical role, and nothing to minimize what they do. But the thing is, the business analyst is actually looking at only one slice of data that we interested in as a product manager. A product manager, on the other hand, is looking at a 360 view of the product itself and really understanding, using the data that the business analyst provides, for example, to help frame what the customer is, who the customer is, and what they're doing. But that doesn't help sometimes get the idea of what is the customer problem that they're facing. So that's the other aspects that the product manager will look at, is not just looking at what's the customer doing today, but also what does the customer's profile look like as they look ahead, and what is changing in the market or the environment around them that opens up new opportunities, and then be able to translate that very quickly into a set of what we would call requirements for the customer. So and then of course working with the other internal team members to delivering the product and then taking it to market and communicating its value, etc. to the customer. So it's a much more of a 360 role as a product manager than just what perhaps a business is running over.
Got it. So it's much more encompassing, and maybe this is kind of a subset of what you might need but there's a lot more.
Absolutely.
A related question from Sunil, Sunil Kaur is, hey, how is this different than project management in that case? We talked about business analyst, but
Yeah.
how is this different than, and I'm sure, we've seen companies where we have both project managers and product managers.
Right.
So yeah.
The product manager defines, I was just going to say that the project manager's role is critical in making sure that the delivery of the product happens on time and it's delivered to the customer's hands very quickly. I mean, typically, the project managers I've worked with are stellar people in terms of making sure that every stakeholder in the business is actually tracking to what their commitments are. And so that, the product manager has defined, the why and the what. The engineering teams, etc., are people who are building the product are the how in terms of using technology to deliver to the requirements that were defined. And then the project manager really is stitching all of this together to make sure that everything gets delivered on time. Right? To keep the trains running on time and making sure that everybody is aware of their accountability and they're tracking to it. So it's a very critical role in terms of making sure everything gets done. But it is not it's a different function than what a product manager's role is in the team, but equally critical.
Got it. And I think we were chatting earlier. There's a lot of people who transition from project management to product management, and that's because they probably want to go more from the tactical side to the more strategic side, right? That's kind of another way.
That's right.
Absolutely.
In many companies, these two functions sit within the same group, so that they work very closely together. And like you rightly said, people go from project managers into becoming product managers because they just work so closely with product managers. They just become move in that direction themselves.
Super. Here's another question from Tejas, and so Tejas's question is more around how do you kind of transition more from product services company as you take up a move towards product management. So, are people working in the services industry something that can move up to product management? And from your own viewpoint, would you be open to looking at candidates who don't necessarily come from a pure product background, but maybe more product engineering services background or services background?
Yeah. No, we have examples of people who have made that move from services companies into becoming product companies and product managers. The difference is, of course, that in services companies, it's about taking existing products and stitching them together into a solution that, and of course, building code around it to make sure that this is particularly in the software services domain, to deliver a solution to the customer. But in many cases, the unique solution for a customer, and they don't have a cost-cutting product in that sense. Where I've seen successful people moving from the services organizations into a product organization. In many cases, they actually go through either a certification program or in many cases they've gone back to their MBA and then they enter the product companies. Or the services companies even today, there is a push to productize, where essentially they're looking at services that they're delivering repeatedly for different customers, and then look at the commonality of that and be able to convert that into a product. So there perhaps other opportunities even within existing services organizations to start moving towards becoming a product manager.
Perfect. Yeah, makes sense. So here's a couple questions from Purvi, and maybe a related question from Sudeep, which is, how do you work with the product management and more of the technology track people, right? So people who are kind of solutions architect, people who are in the technology, but still maybe a little bit of customer-facing ladder. How would you? The question is, how do they work together? Obviously, and is there a set of interactions that's kind of best practices between, let's say, a solution architect, an engineering leader, and a product manager?
Yeah, there definitely is. I mean, like I mentioned in the beginning, the product manager is, in some sense, holds the success of a product in their hands, because ultimately, they have to be clear, or they have to have made the right decisions when they're defining the product. So in that sense, working very closely with sales folks, marketing people, solution architects, etc., in one understanding what is the customer pain points today is very important. So there is a certain amount of work that happens before a product gets built. Then when they take the product to market, the product manager is responsible to make sure that they're translating the product that is, trying to solve the customer's problem and translating that into something that the customer values, so that they're able to go out, the other stakeholders in the business, whether it is people who are customer facing in the sales aspects, they are able to go out and talk effectively about the value of the product to the customer and be able to match that to the pain point that the customer is having. So product manager has a touch point with external facing folks clearly right through the product life cycle. Now on the engineering side, the product manager has to make sure that the engineering teams are really understand what is it that that they are trying to address, so that they have a very clear picture of who the customer is, what are the pain points they're having, and what would they value. Because engineering can build a lot of things, but they really need to focus on what is the most critical pieces that the customer is going to value. And that's where the relationship with the engineering manager becomes really important, because they have to work very closely together in making sure that they're prioritizing very clearly what needs to be built and getting it built on time, so that the product manager can then work with the other people to take the product to market. So the relationship between engineering manager and a product manager has to be very, very tight.
Excellent. Okay, so there's a lot of questions. Here we have from Sri Mahesh, from Raj, from Ankur Jain, and a couple others, Sharad, and a few others. So I think all of their questions, if I were to paraphrase, you mentioned this MBA and mini MBA and relevant program. Is there a program like this in India, and where can we find more information? So I think maybe that's a great question that we will reserve, not so much for Ram, although Ram, you can comment on it. We'll reserve it for Rahul, who is actually going to talk more about that program and what's getting launched in India. So great questions, but I think let's pause answering that until we get to Rahul. Here's one more. SaaS. So they're saying software as a service versus typical product. Is the product management different? Is everything you said still applicable to both? Or if you're in a software as a service, cloud computing type of product, then product management, is that any different? Does it follow different rules than what you've said? That's the question here.
Yeah, I think where it is different is the domain. So now even within software, there are many different domains. And software as a service, cloud computing, and even within cloud computing, it breaks down to whether it's infrastructure computing or applications. All of these are domain expertises that somebody has to gain when they work there. But the skills that I mentioned, whether they're the soft skills or the functional skills, they don't change. That is the reason why we focus on functional skills and soft skills as primary selection criteria, because the domain changes so much that you could be working even within cloud computing or even within software as a service, and that itself is changing on a daily basis. So if you're not, if you don't have the first two skill sets, you're not keeping an eye on the market, you're not trying to constantly understand your customer, you're not watching the trends in the market, then you really are going to miss the boat in terms of understanding the domain. So that's why we don't focus as much on domain, because we expect the product manager to keep up. So I would say the functional skill set and soft skills translate very nicely across anything that you work on. But it's the domain expertise that changes, and if if that's an area that somebody is passionate about working on, then they need to start picking up domain expertise there in that space.
Got it. Makes sense. Here's a question. Okay, so that's one more question on the whole which certifications will be relevant and MBA. So I think we'll defer that until a little later, till Rahul comes on and talks a little bit about this. But here's another one. From a scope and growth. So this is a question from Harsha, and his question is, hey, what's the scope and growth of product manager as a function, as a role in India within an organization? So that's actually a question that's related to some of the other questions that Ankur and Faisal and others have asked, which is, how do you kind of move up the career path? At the end of the day, where does this career path even land up being? So any comments? I know you probably have traversed this all the way now to becoming the vice president for product management. What are your thoughts there?
No, I think ultimately, product managers are as much can climb into the CEO's role within a company as anybody else coming from other functions. So we have seen examples of that, quite effectively, where people come out of product management ranks and gain such an appreciation for the overall business that eventually, they become, leaders of the company. Now, in terms of the opportunity in India, I think it's a great question because that is evolving rapidly. The opportunities are opening up considerably, and the reason for that is one is large companies like ourselves, who are looking for adding on, who are transitioning, the MNCs are moving up from delivery centers into becoming product centers. So these will by necessity require specialist functions like product management and user experience design, senior architects, those kinds of roles. The second driving function that I see in India, particularly right now, is startups. NASSCOM tells us that we have almost over 3,000 startups in India, and this is in software alone, right? This doesn't include pharma, it doesn't include manufacturing, it doesn't include a whole bunch of other kinds of companies which are starting up. Many of them, by necessity, are starting to look at markets not just in India but looking beyond India, and are looking for product managers. So the opportunity for a product manager, actually that is one of the biggest gating functions today. I know that for a fact in startup companies, software startup companies in India. They're not able to find good experienced or good well-trained product managers who can come in and start immediately focusing the company and the product that they're working on towards the customer. So clearly in the as we look ahead, the opportunity is going to be fairly large, and it's really going to be gated by the lack of availability of product managers than by the lack of opportunity for them. So clearly I think the product management function has got a lot of scope in it.
Excellent. Very promising to hear that. And this is from a guy who is not giving an academic view. He's from the industry, one of the senior veterans of product management in this part of the world. So that says a lot. Now, maybe one last quick question on this, and then kind of moving on to our next speaker. But the question is more from, say, Naveen. Naveen Sisodia has asked the same question, similar to that as Mahesh Mahali and others. So basically, the question is, we talked a little bit about engineering and architect and kind of they moving into product management. We also talked a little bit about how project managers and business analysts eventually aspire to become a product manager as they kind of move from tactical role play to more strategic, as you call the CEO of the program. Now, what about sales? What about pre-sales? What about BD, business development, and kind of more pure outbound, completely outbound customer selling function? What's your advice for them as they kind of look forward to get into the product management function?
No, I think they immediately bring customer knowledge to the table. So I think, like I mentioned earlier, right, the first thing, one of the big skills is the fact that how well do you understand your customer. And salespeople, just by function, what they do, are living with the customer on a daily basis and really, feeling the customer's pain point. So I think, clearly they bring one component of what is required in product management right off the bat, the customer empathy and the market, and they are constantly selling against their own competition, so they know what's going on. All of these kinds of things. So they immediately bring that. By nature, salespeople are good communicators because of the fact that they have to go out and sell the product. And so they're very good at, tuning themselves for what the customer is, what will attract the customer to buying their product. So again, soft skills. So they're very good with soft skills. So they have the first two. Now the question is for them to switch to becoming a product manager. Do they, they need to kind of switch hats a little bit and go from, inside out selling to becoming an outside in kind of a person and start picking up the domain that they, that they operate in and start getting more interested in the technology of what they work on and then doing those kinds of things so that they can take the outside in skill, the customer empathy skills that they already have developed, and translating that to be much more effective in building something, internally, working with internal stakeholders on building. And I think that's where, that's the transition I see in a lot of people who are external facing today need to make to actually becoming a good product manager.